Ready? We're good. Good afternoon. I'll call this meeting to order. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's move on to our public comments. Mr. Doyle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We have 4 speakers this afternoon. How much time can we allot?
Let's do 5 minutes.
Okay.
A little different.
Our first speaker is Helen Story, who will discuss Constitution Week.
Can we go to number 2 first? They want to switch places.
Our next speaker is Patricia Hein, who will discuss DAR.
Right, thank you. I'm Patricia Hein, and we just organized a new DAR chapter in Ackworth. The local DAR chapters in Cobb County, we did get together to determine which schools would fall under each DAR chapter. And so ours is primarily in Ackworth. What I've done is I've handed out a few things that what DAR does, the Daughters of the American Revolution. We go into the schools with different essay contests, giving awards like ROTC, etc. And the reason I wanted to speak first over Helen, she's with the Constitution Week. Our year is from September through May, and the reason I'm here is to ask for any assistance possible. On the second page, I have a list of our schools. We're the Liberty Hill chapter. And this is a list of schools that we would like to go to, and with the different chairmanships saying, who is an American history teacher at your school? Who is the ROTC instructor for us to give a medal to? And if I could get any assistance, I did go to one of the high schools earlier this year prior to the ROTC award ceremony, and I didn't get positive feedback for assistance. So if there's any way that you can ask the schools that are listed here to work with us, we'd like to come in. We are a service organization, but the different committees and what each one we would do at the schools is basically on the first page, along with awards and medals that we give. There are additional committees, for instance, community classroom, educational resources, and literacy promotion. That's just for us to be able to help the teachers that are in the schools. The second page I have here is who the different point of contacts are in our chapter, and then some further information about the committees are on the next 3 pages. Since we start in September, the first thing that happens is Constitution Week, and that's Helen Story is here. She's our Constitution Week chairman, and she will come next and talk to you about Constitution Week. So, thank you.
Our next speaker is Helen Story, who will discuss Constitution Week.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ragsdale and board members. It's good to be here. As a former teacher and now retired from Dodgen Middle School, it's a pleasure to come before you and speak about Constitution Week. I have ordered constitutions from Liberty Day, which is located in Denver, Colorado, and hopefully they'll be in here by Monday, and I can bring them by central office so that you can see these. They have simplified lessons in them with a game in the center, with a provided lesson plan for each teacher in the classroom. And then, of course, we want to also distribute to the students would be the George Mason writing on the Bill of Rights to give to the students in each setting. Those are provided for by government publications and also with DAR as well. We go into the classrooms and we give out the information to the principals if they like. If you wish for a teacher to come in, we could do that. However, I realize that under the expertise and protocol with our Cobb County school system, it is very good to always have the advice of the principal. and the principals can bring this before their teacher staff and decide what to do with permission of the board members. But anyway, we look forward to doing that. If you want more advanced writings on the Constitution, I can secure those through some of our elected officials. We look forward to it, and if by all means do keep in touch with me and Patricia Hine, my regent for my chapter of Liberty Hill DAR. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Kelly Painter, who will discuss class sizes and other issues.
Greetings. My name is Kelly Painter. I have a child at Eastside Elementary, represented by Mr. Banks, and also a child at Dodgen, represented by Mr. Sweeney. I'd also like to thank the entire board and Superintendent Ragsdale for all they do for our county. I do have 3 suggestions to make today, all in the kindest, most constructive manner. First, I believe the time is long overdue to restore smaller class sizes in Cobb County, especially at large schools where there are 9 to 10 classrooms per grade level, such as Eastside, and 16 homeroom teachers for 6th grade alone at Dodgen. The year before my 6th grader began kindergarten, the state maximum was 20 students in kindergarten, 21 in grades K through 3, and 28 in grades 4 through 8, according to the official code of Georgia. Both of my children have had 26 to 27 students in their classrooms every year since kindergarten. My oldest had 30 in 4th grade, 32 in 5th grade, and now at Dodgen has 35 in every core class. It is very much appreciated that the board has given teachers raises, but now it is time to make a concerted effort to lower class sizes by at least 3 to 4 students per class. If this necessitates the use of portable classrooms, aka learning cottages, aka trailers, I, as well as several other parents with whom I have discussed this issue, am in full favor of this option. Second, social media is abuzz with countywide bus issues. It is time that we pay our bus drivers a livable wage and give them better working conditions, including air conditioning on the buses. These individuals literally have our children's lives in their hands. I want to do the right thing by the environment and put my children on the bus, but if overcrowded and unsafe conditions continue to exist, such as 3 middle schoolers per seat along with all their band instruments, along with a lack of drivers, then more parents are going to crowd the already trafficky roads to transport their children by car, which, as we know, causes numerous problems for school employees and parking situations. I also wish that Cobb County would implement a bus tracking app like Marietta City Schools so that parents could always know the status of their child's bus. Finally, a few years ago, Cobb changed its allotment for library media parapros at the middle and high school levels from 100% to 60%. Now that the economy has recovered, please reconsider restoring those allotments back to 100%. While I appreciate that Cobb has continued to value the role of a full-time librarian at every school, those individuals cannot do their job fully during the 40% of their time when they are alone in the media center. Parapros are essential for the running of a library. They take care of the administrative duties so that the library media specialist can focus on collaborating with teachers, implementing technology initiatives, and designing initiatives that increase student achievement. Thank you for your consideration, and again, I appreciate all that you do for the students and parents of Cobb County.
Our final speaker, Mr. Chairman, is Mr. Kermit Keenum, who will discuss a tribute to a former board member.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to come today before you to pay tribute to a board member. That may not happen real often, but I think it should. The person I want to talk with you about today passed away a little over a month ago. Harold Posey served on this Cobb Board of Education for a total of 18 years. He was elected to this board in 1972, started his tenure in 1973, and was elected for 5 terms and served 4.5 terms and resigned from the board for family and business reasons in 1991. Harold was a special individual. He was 35 years old when he was elected to the board. And his reason, of course, was his passion for education and his love for children and wanting to do something for this county and for this school district. And we're better because he made that choice. I remember very well Harold's first responsibility as a board member in his second month in office was to vote for the second elected superintendent of the Cobb County School District, and by an elected board as opposed to an appointed board. And he cast that vote. He served on the board with 2 superintendents, and I was honored to be one of those for about a 10-year period. And Harold, I want you to know a little bit about him for those of you that started in the 90s or beyond that time. Harold was born in Kingston, Georgia, just north of Cartersville, attended the elementary school there, was an outstanding student. Then he went on from there to the Berry School for Boys in Rome and was an outstanding student there. He came to Atlanta and attended Georgia State and received a business degree there, and then moved almost immediately after that time frame to Cobb County and started his tenure here in both business and service on the board. He served in the district at that time that included Pebblebrook High School. And I remember very well the first conversation we had on a one-to-one basis of, what do you want to do? I asked him, Harold, as a board member, what are you concerned about in your district? And he said, Pebblebrook High School is a very small area. I'm very concerned as the county continues to grow, what will happen? He said, I'd like for you to develop a plan to where Pebblebrook will have a future. And those were his words. We were able to basically develop a plan, which he supported from day one, to buy some 20 plus additional acres adjacent to, at that time, Lindley Middle School. And we moved Lindley Middle School and Pebblebrook, switched campuses, and it gave Pebblebrook the opportunity and the space to become a high school. And he had a vision during that time that it needs to be a special high school. And he didn't say what, he just wanted Pebblebrook to be a special high school. And as all of you know, that would happen. And it was developed into the Performing Arts School with the recognition that is given to Cobb County for so many years. So I'm very grateful to Harold for what he did and the service he gave to this school district and to our county. And Elizabeth, his wife, his daughter Amy, and Lori, I had the opportunity to go to his memorial service and to talk with them and to share on behalf of Cobb County our appreciation. And his love for education needs to, I can tell you this too about him that many of you wouldn't know. He actually went back and got a law degree while he was working as well, just because he loved education and he thought that would make him better prepared as a businessman and as a board member. I'm thankful to Harold. I'm thankful to his family, and I'm thankful to all of you who give your time and your service to make our county and our school district better. Thank you for allowing me to make the comment, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, public speakers. Next, we have approval of the minutes from the July 19th Second Tax Digest meeting, the July 19th Third Tax Digest meeting, and the July 19th Board meeting. If there are no objections to approval, they are approved. And we are now ready to go with board business, and let's begin with Mr. Morgan.
Good afternoon to everyone. Appreciate the opportunity, Mr. Chair. I would like Mr. Superintendent to see if we can get an update about Man, don't come, bruh. Just trying to get through my stuff. I'm just not even. Early kindergarten at Belmont Hills in Norton Park to see how we're progressing and expanding and all that good stuff.
Thank you for your question, Mr. Morgan. Last summer, you will remember that the district offered what we called an early K class at Belmont Hills as part of the district's research into what options are available for meaningful and sustainable pre-K options for our students and communities. Based on the initial findings of last year's cohort, we were able to expand the opportunity to include 2 schools this past summer, and that would be Belmont Hills as well as Norton Park. Both schools were housed at Belmont Hills to maximize the resources in order to provide as many spaces available as we had students interested. Students began June 4th and came every day for 6 weeks. It was a traditional elementary school day. We had 37 students participating, which gave us approximately 2 kindergarten class sizes. This was the second year for Belmont Hills, so obviously we had more students register as that community is a bit more familiar with how this works going into the second year. We evaluated these students using pre- and post-assessments on standards such as recognizing upper and lowercase letters, other foundational skills such as letter sound recognition, sight words, rhyming, and retelling a story. The average growth for areas for these students was anywhere between 18 and 45%. Though we certainly want to look at the pre and post data for those 6 weeks, we are almost more interested in what is the long-term impact of that early learning. So, of course, we've been watching the students who completed Belmont a year ago and watched where they performed by the end of kindergarten. We will continue to watch them into first and second, the goal being that by the end of second grade, you're on or above grade level. So we're tracking to see what the long-term impact of that 6 weeks is, as well as what the pre and post just for that 6 weeks. We look for things such as how many were on or above grade level, did any qualify for additional services. We also look at behavior and attendance, because not only is the pre and post data important, but sometimes just that self-efficacy of being in school early and feeling more confident can have an impact on academic achievement. At this time, we're following up with surveys and phone calls to the parents to learn more about what worked for them, suggestions they may have, how we could expand and make sure that our parents know what's available and make them comfortable to participate in this with us moving forward so we can make a recommendation going into next summer.
Thank you, Ms. Lawson. Any questions? Mr. Banks?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If I understood you correctly, you said 37 students participated in the summer program?
Yes, sir.
Was that for the 2 schools combined?
Yes, sir. We had a class full from Belmont. Any student who was registered had the option to attend, and we had that number of parents who chose to exercise that option.
Okay, my question would be the participation. Out of those 2 schools, what was the total number of students for kindergarten this year?
Belmont Hills, I know off the top of my head, has 3 kindergarten classes, so a third of their students were present. I don't know the Norton Park numbers off the top of my head as readily.
So assume there was a third also. Is that satisfactory?
I would say that what we did see as we watched the progress for Belmont, sometimes we have to do a little bit of networking and building trust with the community to turn over their babies a little bit earlier than the first official day of school. So last year at Belmont, we went out there and really had to work hard to let parents understand what this was and why it was important. This year, instead of us looking for kids, we had a preponderance that quickly showed up. We certainly have some more room to grow in that, and that's one of the things we want to look at in talking to our parents and talking to members of the community is what would it take? How do we convince more parents to take advantage of these opportunities for their children?
Do we know why the parents that did participate, why they did, and do we know why the ones that did not participate, why they didn't?
We've asked those that did participate, of course, gave the answers such as they knew it was of value. They were very interested in their student having an upper hand, so to speak, and being able to transition when it's just that group of kids as opposed to several hundred children who show up on the very first day of school. So they were very committed. We did ask, some parents were just very reluctant to put their babies on the bus. We did offer transportation this year. So there were some of those factors. The other things that we asked, Norton Park, they were at one facility to maximize resources, and though Norton Park is very close to Belmont, that's not their neighborhood school. So getting parents to feel comfortable with going to another school, even though it's close by, if siblings are at Norton Park, there are some of those factors that we believe contributed to getting the word out and a better participation. But it did grow this year from the first year we did it last year.
Okay, so in 2019, what are our plans?
Well, we haven't actualized those yet. We're still interviewing parents and determining what the budget would be and what looks like a good investment for us. We also don't want to make those decisions prematurely until we can look. We've got a group of children going into first grade that did this a year ago. We want to see how they're performing, and then obviously we'll come back and make a recommendation about how we could expand this moving forward.
Since you're accumulating data, will you share that with the board when it's appropriate?
Yes, sir. Actually, Mr. Ragsdale has asked us to prepare a broader literacy update that we'll be doing shortly, and so that information will be in there in the very near future.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Morgan?
No,
Ms. Thayer?
Well, I want to break with procedure a little bit, but there's no other place to do it. And I'm commenting on a public speaker, which we don't normally do, but again, this is a different procedure. But Mr. Keenum, thank you very much for representing our school system at Mr. Posey's memorial service. I didn't realize that he had passed, or I would have been there myself. He is a great part of our history, and I don't know whether we had any other representatives there, or whether we were even aware of his passing, but he's truly a part of what makes us great. I was at Pebblebrook, so I know. I was there right after he left the board, so I know the importance of the foundation that he made in that community, the difference that he made, and I truly thank him and his memory for what he did for our system. But again, sometimes I think we forget about our past and we don't recognize it enough. So I appreciate your coming today, and I appreciate that you did represent us at that very important time. So thank you, sir, for that. As far as our program right here, the pre-kindergarten programs, obviously, logic would tell you this is the way to go. And measurement's important, and the fact that we continue these as we have money, it's the only way to be able to attack the problems that we have in our lower achieving schools. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thayer. Mr. Morgan?
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. All right, David, you took most of my questions, man. You did a good job. You learned well from me, ain't you, bro?
Same level.
There you go. There you go.
Smarter than I am.
Okay, I appreciate that. I think you answered the question, Jennifer, when you said that the broader literacy, I guess, the presentation or report that you'll be bringing forward, because I'm looking forward to seeing not only whatever anecdotal information we might have from the babies who started, but the kids who did it last year, and seeing. So it's my assumption that that level of, we did a report before on that, right? When you were showing, we had numbers and things of that nature. I'm really excited about seeing that. Before we're looking at that, with what type of time frame are we looking to see that broader literacy presentation?
We have that due to Mr. Ragsdale here in the next couple weeks, so I'm sure he'll determine from there when we'll do a presentation.
Okay, one other quick question is, were there any change? I mean, of course, we expanded the program, but were there any other changes we learned from last summer to this summer in terms of how the program was implemented?
A couple of the things that came about, we had an incredible teacher. I know the board saw her at Belmont who did it all summer, that first summer. One of the lessons learned was the request to maybe have 2 teachers to share that responsibility, so that we don't want our teachers to come back on the first day of school tired and worn out. So we had teachers that, in this case, decided to split it. So for the first 3 weeks, they had 1 teacher, and then halfway through, they had a second teacher. So we certainly were receptive to what works for the teacher as well as the student. Offered transportation this summer, which we had not done the summer before. We also offered breakfast and lunch through a grant, so it didn't cost the parents any money. So there were several of those things. We're also looking at the data of student performance to determine if there are any tweaks to the instructional models that we created. Obviously, the goal for these kids was really to give them a very literacy-rich environment, while they also had the benefit of just sort of seeing how school works. For a lot of our students, these are students who have not had a pre-K experience, and so we want the first day of school to come along and them to feel confident in where they are and to be ready for learning on the first day rather than getting through some of the routines that sometimes accompany the first day.
Final question, Mr. Chair. For someone that might be watching this meeting, how do we choose the schools? Why Belmont Hills and Norton Park? Like, what's the process for saying, okay, it's this school?
When we originally selected Belmont Hills, it was one of the schools that we identified for our literacy work. So they were very instrumental in the processes that we use with that work. We had a very interested leader, and it was a small school that we could get started and figure out. They currently, as a matter of fact, have 55 kindergartners at Belmont. So to have about half of them in this program. Then when we looked to expand, we looked at several factors. One of them being that Norton Park is also in the literacy work. They're also very close to Belmont, and so those principals came together and we did some professional development and discussions about what that could look like to have a shared space. So we're looking at expanding, but to answer your question, that's how we've gotten to this point.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan. Mr. Banks.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Lawson, was this program part of the bridge program, or is it a separate program?
No, sir, it really was separate. The summer bridge was set into place earlier, and so we had set aside some funds to do a proof of concept with this.
Okay. So we did have, how many schools do we have in the bridge program this year?
Who took advantage of the summer bridge grant opportunity? Is that what you're referring to?
Well, did we use all the grant money?
Yes, sir. I'll go back and see. I believe at the end of May, we sent a board update to say which schools have participated and the funding and all that, but I can go back and check on that for you again. But yes, sir, we did use the entire allotted amount.
Okay. Could you, in the literacy program, could you give us specific goal accomplishments that we achieved this year?
So,
Well, I think, let me jump in here. I think what you're asking is how did those students perform? Did we get a bang for the buck? And that's going to be part of the presentation. So obviously the data will be comparing, because one of the points to the early kindergarten program was to maintain that group of kindergartners together as they went throughout the year, so that at the end of the kindergarten year of last year, we could compare their performance with all other kindergarten classes to see if the additional 6 to 8 weeks did boost their level of preparation for kindergarten, so they maintain that upward trajectory in academic performance. So that will absolutely be part of it. As far as the goal is to increase that level of preparedness as kindergartners are coming into the class. So that was the primary goal. Yeah. Well,
I've got a question, but I'm not going to ask it about preparation of student kindergarten, being prepared, ready to go to kindergarten. So, but I'll ask that later. But that's a concern I have, is when we're talking about kindergarten, some are ready and some aren't. So, did we distinguish between that? But I'll save that for later. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Okay. No further questions. We go to WellStar Partnership, Mr. Morgan.
Yes, this is I guess this is a feeder pattern, so to speak, into early kindergarten, if you really think about it. Probably a year or so ago, I remember some people some individuals from Wellstar came in, and we developed a partnership which would give mothers the opportunity to start that process of literacy even before pre-K. And I know I've just been adamant because from the presentation that was given, it seems that it could be very promising and very fruitful. And I know a couple months ago, I brought that before the board. So I know some more information might be in at this point where we can figure out where we are and where we might need to go.
As Mr. Morgan mentioned, the Cobb County School District and Wellstar Health System through Dr. Avril Beckford, I believe is who you were referencing, Mr. Morgan, who's the Chief Pediatric Officer for Wellstar, began to explore the possibility of a Birth to 5 partnership where pediatricians and educators are very intentionally partnering with parents to promote literacy and brain health. As we reported to the board in January of this past year, in February we began phase 2 of this pilot, whereby we were implementing some of the changes that the pediatric offices and parents had given us some feedback on. One of those was introducing tablets to the parents to complete the survey while they were at the pediatric office, adjusting the age bands when parents were receiving the postcards and the questions from the pediatricians, and translating the postcards into other languages. We're currently completing phase 2 of the proof of concept. We've collected 1,854 survey responses. Approximately 1,700 independent families have been impacted through this program with response. 2,275 books have been provided. Based on some of the initial information, we want to look at partners identifying some additional funding sources so that we can really look at what else is needed to continue to provide the postcards, to continue to provide the books. You may recall that one of the pediatric offices we were able to fund so that the parents not only received the postcard for that developmental age, but they also received the book that has a QR code on the back of the postcard of a professional kind of modeling how a parent is using that book at that age with that child. So we're comparing the data of what the parents have said that got the hardback book as opposed to those that did not. They just received the postcard and could use an electronic copy of the book, or they could purchase their own, so that we could use that data to possibly look at some grant or foundation opportunities to fund this on a much grander scale. We also learned that we want to look at hosting some community outreach opportunities for parent engagement that the doctors and we as educators could partner with. That was some of the feedback. We have a follow-up meeting scheduled for September 20th. Dr. Avril has been out of the country for a little while, and so on the 20th we're going to debrief everything we have and decide next steps with the group from there.
Thank you, Ms. Chair. Additional funding, cost. What is the current cost, and what would be what would allow us to expand in what you communicated?
Currently, the funds that have been used have been through a GOSA grant from the state for early literacy, and so we had a grant for about $10,000. So it is quite a monumental task. We have 3 pediatric offices. Those can range from 500 to 5,000 children, depending on the size of the practice and how many pediatricians are in that office. So we know that it has cost us about $10,000 to run the postcards for each developmental stage and for these 3 offices. We also know what the cost was. It was a few $1,000s to secure the books. Scholastic was very generous with us. So those are the principal expenditures that we're then banking on how we would expand. But again, we're anxious for Wellstar. We did do an evening meeting with them and their pediatricians to share with them, and so those are the pediatricians that eagerly signed up. So we're anxious to see. They've looked at their foundation as well. The Wellstar Foundation may be interested in funding this work moving forward.
One other question, Mr. Chair, if I might. What is success? That program worked if what happens?
Well, the idea is that if you move into Cobb County and you just naturally, when you go to the pediatrician, there's automatically a structure of support. Your pediatrician is asking, providing you the postcards, asking those questions that are similar to what we have in the survey. But in addition, that postcard also has resources to your Cobb County School District, so that we have an early learning page, so that we really are supporting, to your point, Mr. Morgan, that birth to 5, knowing that you're part of our community, even if you turn 5 and show up on a particular day for kindergarten, you're part of this community 5 years prior to that. And we know that the research says the first 3 years of life is such significant brain development. So success to us is that we really have built a feeder pattern into readiness for kindergarten and a sense of community about literacy changing the lives of children.
Okay. I thought it was the last one, Mr. Chair. So success would be participation. We are getting people to participate, and we're able to go ahead.
So I think this is one of those things to where just by simply having the program is what success is. Because to your point, participation. If you didn't have the program, then you don't have a concerted effort of pediatricians that are employed by Wellstar providing and pointing to resources for new parents with children before they get school age. So to your, to your mainstream idea of parental engagement, I think this is the start of that. And again, I think success is measured simply by how many pediatricians in Wellstar, and if it expands to all pediatricians within Cobb County, how many are participating. I think that's the level of success, because as long as the pediatricians are doing that one thing, which really is not huge, but it can pay huge dividends. So I think success is really measured by the program itself existing in this manner.
And right now, I heard you say the number 1,700 families?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so that would, we could say that that's what our participation, or, I mean, of course, it's not exact, but roundabout number about where, how many, I guess, interactions or integrations we've had, we've had with families being a part of this program. Okay, so I guess that would be a barometer. If next year, if it's 3,400 or 2,200, we'll be able to gauge based upon like maybe this baseline of
Well, and I think some of the
families.
survey data will also tell us, is it meeting parents' needs? So as they tell us, has this changed the way, one of the questions on the survey says, does your visit to the doctor and the resources that you were provided, did you do anything with them? And so we've got some yes, some no. And so some of it tells us where even the sharing of the information is different by office. So we want to shore up some of those processes. So we're wanting the parent feedback. But to Mr. Ragsdale's point, having it available and putting books and resources and having a pediatrician talk to a parent about the importance of talking to your children and having those experiences, is all about what we want students to come at 5 years old ready to do.
Thank you. We're now ready for the superintendent's report. Mr. Ragsdale.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. As we do annually, we do have a first day video. As we get ready to view that video, I'll go ahead and address something. It never ceases to happen every year. Everybody is interested in enrollment. We had a public speaker addressing enrollment as well today already. So let me just go ahead and say that this year you got to be careful to compare apples to apples, of course, because everything is generally based on the October FTE count, which does not happen for another 7 weeks, give or take. So looking at apples to apples, though, on the first 10 days, we are right now trending at 75 students over what we had last year. So as a district, we're up a whopping, 4 classes, give or take. So that being said, we will look forward to getting that October FTE count. So we'll be able to see exactly what that FTE enrollment is trending. So we will definitely be tracking that and paying close attention to it. And as you know, growth occurs in different areas So as that growth occurs, we have the allotments that have been made available. Sherry has done a great job, her and her staff, and also her team, making sure that we have the allotments in the appropriate area. And there comes a time where you may have to have a teacher move from one school to another, because we're certainly not in the situation to where we can allow allotments to remain at a place where they're truly not needed when we do have a need at other schools. So that being said, it was a very exciting first day of school on August 1st, as it will be August 1st next year, and the next year, as we have determined that. You have determined that with the calendar, so that's an exciting thing that we don't have to think about. No questions yet, Mr. Morgan. Just keep your shirt on there, man. Come on, now, stay with me. So, but it's always exciting to get out in the first day and see the different levels of excitement at elementary, middle, and high. You can go to any elementary school on first day. You can go to any elementary school on the 51st day, and generally, it's all happy. Middle school, they are going to shoot you straight, as many of you were at the Teacher of the Year, and is everybody excited to be back in school? And it was a pretty much common answer of no at middle school. So, but it is exciting to see the enthusiasm in the teachers as well on that first day, and it's just real easy to see why it's always better in Cobb when you see the teachers and what they're doing in the classrooms. So if we can roll that first day video.
First day, right? First day. Remember, Mike has no short arms. Have a great year.
So I want to give a shout out and a thank you to Due West Elementary, Lost Mountain Middle, and Harrison High School for allowing us to interrupt some of their classes on the first day. And just FYI, the conversation with the elementary student at Due West was about Monsters, Inc. and Mike Wazowski. So, if we weren't making fun of anybody by saying we need to draw short arms. It was the picture of Mike Wazowski that he was drawing. So, with that, again, it's just a real exciting time of year when you get that enthusiasm in first day, first week, and just excited to see the success that our teachers are going to bring us with our students this year. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. John Floresta to come and bring us an update on the milestones. Oh, sorry.
I was just going to say that video is great, but one thing I would comment is I saw how quickly that Scantron sheet was being filled out. Yeah. We do not recommend that.
Good afternoon, Board and Mr. Superintendent. It is my pleasure to give you an update on milestones from the 2017-2018 school year. Before I do, I appreciated Mr. Morgan's use of the word or the phrase student success when we were talking about the Wellstone partnership, because really milestones are just one piece of that phrase that we all know so well: one team, one goal, student success. I think there's a conversation that sometimes we have about what does student success look like, and as we talk about how Cobb students are doing, on the Georgia milestones, I think it's important to lead with, in Cobb, we know that we can know more about our kids than the milestones tell us, and that the milestones give us one piece, but it is just one piece of a puzzle. Kids are kids before they're students, and we don't believe that one score on one grade on one day defines what success looks like for a kid. And we think, frankly, that we can inform what instruction can and should look like with more powerful data. And I just want to make that comment as we begin. Having said that, as you know, Georgia milestones are the state of Georgia's assessments given at the end of the semester, or in some cases the end of the academic year. They are the basis for the state's accountability system, CCRPI. Results are received by the district in the middle of July and provide a grade to teachers about how their students performed in the previous school year. Hold that thought and we'll come back to it shortly. The public and the board have received both Georgia milestone summaries and details, both of which are available on our website. Today's presentation will provide the board with a summary of the Cobb County School District's performance on the milestones for both fall and spring administrations of the 2017 to 2018 school year. We will be comparing our student scale scores with our metropolitan peers, and I am very happy to report that the students of Cobb County have scored higher than the state average in every grade and every subject area, grades 3 through 12, as assessed by the Georgia milestones. And in addition, Cobb students have scored first in 6 out of 8 categories at the high school level when compared with their metropolitan peers. In English language arts, Cobb students scored in the top 2, again, when compared to our metropolitan peers who you just saw on the screen moments ago, in grades 3, 5, 8, and in high school. In math, Cobb students scored first in grade 8, and again, first in both high school subject areas when compared to our metropolitan peers. In science, Cobb students scored first in grades 8, and first again in physical science, second in biology. And in social studies, Cobb students scored first in both high school subject areas. The Cobb County School District milestone scores, again, underscore what our data internally through CTLS and what other nationally normed assessments tell us. Our students are doing well, they're doing very well, and in fact, our students are successful regardless of their path in life, whether it's taking them to college, career, or other paths in life. I think it's important, again, to understand that the milestones are just one piece of that puzzle, and as you'll see here on this next slide, we've put a sample of the milestone score report in front of you. I think it's important as we talk about what does student success look like, going back to that. You can't have a conversation about student success and what our kids know at 10,000 feet. And what the milestones provide for us, as you're looking at it here, is a score report which tells us, again, one grade, one day, one time at a high level, what a scale score looks like for that student. I don't know, actually I do know, that does not tell me in detail what I would want to know about what a student needs to know and frankly what a teacher can do about it. And I think that's an important piece. We want to empower our teachers with resources that tell them what they know and give them resources to do something about it. If you transition to the next slide, again, you'll see this is the second page of a typical milestones report. It gets a little bit more detailed, but again, still operating at that maybe 5,000 foot level. And I show both of those so I can take us to our last slide, which is a sample of data that's available to us internally through CTLS. You've heard us talk about it in the past. You'll hear us talk about it again over the next weeks and months. When we talk about student success, to go back to that term, we talk about what do our students know and what ultimately can they do. You have to be able to have a conversation about what they know down at the standards level. Again, I'm going to use the analogy. If the first slide was 10,000 feet and the second is 5,000 feet, this is really down in the dirt. This is ground level, actionable data that our teachers can improve their instruction upon immediately. What you're looking at here is standards analysis on a student level, which would allow a teacher to make an immediate instructional decision, not at the end of the year, not 3 months into the summer, 2 months into the summer now. I guess we don't have 3 months in the summer anymore. But 2 months into the summer about kids who they had in classrooms previous year. And I think it's an important note to make that while our students are doing well and they're doing very well in the milestones, In Cobb, we're looking at more than just milestone data. We're looking more than just CCRPI data. We're trying to get as close down to the ground to be able to define what our kids know and what they don't, and provide the resources for them to be able to do something about it. And with that, Mr. Superintendent, Board, that is my update.
So let me follow up on this last slide too, because I know that you recognize as the board that we do pay a lot of attention and have a lot of focus on CTLS. And this is one of the reasons. This is the primary reason, because one of our 3 priorities in the district is to use data to make decisions. The data that CTLS provides the classroom teacher on a daily basis allows that teacher to affect change on a daily basis for each individual student. So when you go back to the previous slides that showed where Cobb is and how many of those categories Cobb is the top performer, that's because the teachers are being provided with the information, the data necessary to individualize each student and their educational process and the progress that needs to be made in the academic performance of each individual student. So again, we don't do these reports to do dog and pony shows. It's not siloed based like many things in education are. You'll have one group doing one thing, one group doing another, and seemingly it's right-hand, left-hand scenario. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing. The point that we want to make is the consistency that we have said we're going to maintain, we do, and it shows in the results that our teachers get. So all of the accolades that were provided by the previous slides about how many categories Cobb is number 1 in the metro Atlanta area, you got to remember we're the 2nd largest district in the state. So to say that we're number 1 in those areas and then not be any lower than number 3, which the top, Gwinnett being the largest school district, when you're talking about being able to have that high level of performance and being the size district that we are, that just again shows the dedication and true commitment that our teachers have and the great things that they're doing in the classroom. Be happy to take any questions on milestones.
Mr. Morgan.
Appreciate it. Thank you for the presentation. This is always dicey for me because I've had to learn the hard way that when you start talking about test scores, you have to navigate it very delicately, but authentically, because people will say, oh, well, you don't support us, you don't support it. I won't go down that rabbit hole. But I want to say that first, John, thank you for the excellent report. Like, I actually literally go through it. I crunch the numbers, and I especially like the summary you gave us with highest gains, lowest gains, things of that nature. And just a few accolades that I want to give, Mr. Chair, if I might, before I ask questions. I really want to shout out the principal at Clay Elementary, Miss Winter. This is why. Chris can verify, I got a spreadsheet full of numbers. Her 3rd graders had a 13.9% gain in students that are proficient in ELA. Her 4th graders in math had a 14.6% gain in students who tested as proficient, making 3s out of 4 in math. Not only that, Ms. Winter at Clay Elementary, this is one of the few times that we had a school in my post that actually matched the district's average in math in 4th grade. Now, see, that's a moment to shout, get up and hallelujah, because, for whatever reasons, she doesn't have a preponderance of kids just showing up knowing how to add, multiply, subtract, and divide, reading and writing. I also want to give a quick shout out to, not just Miss Winter and the staff. I also want to do the same for Dr. Bynes over at Austell Elementary School. Their fourth graders in ELA had 11.2% gain of students who tested as proficient. So I most definitely want to do that and say kudos to them for their effort, their hard work, because it shows. And also, before I get into my questions, again, Mr. Superintendent, as I've done on multiple times, thank you for your commitment to put people in a position to do their jobs better. When you have this information as a teacher, you can't go in there and teach it for them, but I'm in a better position to deliver effective instruction because I have this information. When I taught, we had to do all this stuff by hand, and quite frankly, you just didn't have enough time to do every single student, and you can now press a button or two, and I know where Johnny is on this particular standard, on this. That's powerful stuff, and people who do their jobs well know how powerful it is. Quick story. I remember when I was playing baseball at Grambling State University, my freshman year, right? And I just felt like when I first got there, because I wasn't this ballyhooed recruit, the coach didn't pay a whole lot of attention to me, right? He didn't. He just, but over time I kept working, and I kept working, and he started paying more attention to me. As a matter of fact, got to a point where he would be yelling at me during practice, do this, do that, you got whatever the case might be. And I remember a senior telling me, the more he yells at you, the more he feels like you have something in you to give. So you should take it as a positive. You should worry when he's not paying any attention to you. He ain't saying nothing to you. That's when you should worry. And I say that too, I said that as a preface to say, when I looked at the work that we did in our school district, one of the things that jumped out to me like a sore thumb, it's going to get kind of awkward in here, but I'm about to say it. One of the things that jumped out to me like a sore thumb, guys, was Algebra 1. Algebra 1, my colleague that I'm looking at, Susan, we're struggling. And I say that whole thing about not paying attention because people give lip service to who can learn and who they think can't learn. If you ask the average person, they'll say, oh, all kids can learn. But when you see results that are less than stellar, if there's not outrage, then my conclusion becomes, you don't really think they can learn. Because if you thought they could learn, if you thought I could be a better baseball player, you would keep yelling at me. You would say, come on, Randy. But if you stopped and I was doing this, that means you've ridden me off. And I say that to say this. I almost jumped out of my seat, like gasped, when I looked at 9th grade Algebra 1. I wasn't a good math student, but I did all right in Algebra 1. So I don't think it's something that's really difficult, like, oh my God, it's not calculus 2. We have schools that need dire attention in that area. I'm not in the business of trying to throw anyone under the bus or recite what I have, what I've learned through the information that you guys have given us. But I got to say this part, then I'll be finished, Mr. Chair. We have a school where listen to this number, less than 10% of the students are rated as proficient in Algebra 1. I say all of that to say, guys, I feel like we got to address that head on. There's no looking around it. I conclude by saying, with the highlights that we have, I also want to say, I think it is our responsibility to figure out how we can get more than 8% of the students to be proficient in Algebra 1. And, you know, that's not a good look.
So let me first start out and say that we don't yell at our teachers and we don't yell at our students. So not being yelled at is not to be taken as a negative. Let me first start out with that. Secondly, I do want to give a shout out to, and I'll need to phone a friend, Jennifer Lawson, that on the number, and you may not know it off the top of your head, but this is one that I don't know. But I will tell you that speaking of Algebra 1, McEachern High School and Regina Montgomery, the principal there, was one of the first ones to latch on to CTLS. And when their teachers utilized that data, Algebra 1 growth was tremendous, which is obviously one of your schools, Mr. Wheeler. But Jennifer, do you know that number off the top of your head?
No, sir, I can't. But we had another high school that used CTLS like that and showed double-digit gains this year as well, that we worked very intentionally through a transformation. I just don't recall McEachern's off the top of my head. Yeah,
and so, and if you'll recall, I gave some stats about South Cobb area schools getting a bad rap when they're actually making some tremendous gains, and that's just one example that I do remember right off the top of my head was McEachern, and again it was double-digit gains in Algebra 1. So utilizing that the data, obviously the teachers at McEachern and all those schools, I just remember this one as being a double-digit gain. To your point, Mr. Morgan, about Algebra 1. So again, providing a tool is one thing. Making sure that we're providing the tool and then also keeping it going is quite the challenge, if you will. And I think that as a district, we're definitely meeting and exceeding that challenge.
Mr. Morgan.
One other school that made a double-digit gain in Algebra 1, and of course, that's Spellbrook High School. They had a double-digit gain. I think it was 15 points, somewhere right around in there. So that is something to ballyhoo. That's something to celebrate, because, you know, that means that, you know, that's not some incremental just anomaly. For you to jump that much in 1 year, I don't care if you went from 60 to 72 or if you went from 15 to 27, 28, 29, whatever it is, that's something to celebrate. And I most definitely communicated that to Travis Joshua and his staff. And I have to say this part too. The district, because the district has been very intentional when it comes to the resources, time, and attention that it has given Pebblebrook High School. And I want everyone to hear this, especially people who are always coming to me, why the district don't give the schools in the South resources. The district goes up above and beyond, to be frank with you. But Pebblebrook High School, the district put a lot of things in place, and it says a lot about the competence and the receptivity of Travis Joshua and his staff to receive that, and we're seeing the fruits of the labor. And I'm excited to see what's next. Hey, can you capitalize? Can you win the championship again? Can we see that type of gain next year? So I want to kudos Chris and everyone on that accomplishment.
So let me kind of pile on that one, because, again, going on the one-team approach, which is our mission, when you look at those previous slides, and especially when you drill it down to just high school, to your point, in high school, Cobb was in the #1 slot in 7 out of 8 categories. The 8th category, we were #2. So that being said, again, you remember I said this is not about grammar games. This is real data. And, it was always a great sound bite to say, well, you score above the state and the national average. Well, what does that really mean? Well, what we want to do is take it down and compare it to our neighbors. And when you look at and compare that in that manner, that's what we're talking about it matters, to your point, Mr. Morgan, about how far a school moves, because when you take and compare as a district, That is every single high school in the category, in the 5th and the 3rd and the 8th grade. That is every single middle and elementary school that combines for that average. So to be able to say in high school, in 7 of 8 categories, Cobb is number 1 ranked, that is saying a lot for all of our high schools, regardless of which one it is. And you want to point to the growth that these high schools are making, and the principals and the teachers in those schools are striving to attain, is quite honestly phenomenal. To be 7 out of 8, number 1. That's just a kudos to all of our high schools, but also all of our elementary and middle schools, because the performance shows is the result. The performance shows what the result can be when teachers in the classroom are doing great things, and ours are.
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Just a quick questions relative to the timing of the data release. One thing I hear from a lot of people is that the data that we receive is, in some instances, received latently, and that the teachers who are being measured for performance and student growth don't get information soon enough to modify their instructional plans, per se. And I mean, what knowledge can you share with us about the timing? And before you do, one thing I'm hearing is that perhaps some of that delay is due to summer school and some remedial programs, and like our Department of Labor does, for example, they kind of release a round 1 of data and then a subsequent round 2, when more information comes in. I mean, is there any movement that we see like that?
Yeah, so I'll give you a technical answer first, and then I'm going to give you really the fun answer. The technical answer is we get milestone results the end of July. They're embargoed for a period of about 10 days, and then they're released to the public. We have, again, about a 10-day, 2-week period to be able to crunch them, analyze them, hand them out to staff, and again, all internally embargoed. But let me just go back to that date, and this is maybe the real answer. I don't know about you, but when I'm sick, I don't like being told that I'm sick and we can do something about it, but we'll do something about it 3 months from now. I really don't like it if I go to a doctor and the doctor says, you're sick, but you're going to be with another doctor 3 months from now, and maybe they can figure out if you're sick and then what to do about it. And so the timing of it is real key, and really key. I appreciate you bringing it up, because if assessment is going to be actionable for students, not of students, if it's going to be, our superintendent's line is that it should be a biopsy, not an autopsy. If that's going to happen, we have to have actionable results in the hands of teachers so teachers can make instructional decisions inside the moment. And the closer we can get to real-time data, which allows our teachers to, in fact, act on what our kids know and what they don't, the better. I'll acknowledge that the assessment system, as it's currently constructed in the state, is a byproduct of legislation at the federal level from the 1960s. The reality is the technology didn't exist then that does today, and we're fortunate enough to be one of the very few school districts that has technology that allows us to inform what our kids know on a really granular level. So the technical answer to your question is the middle of July. I think the real answer is that we can know more about our kids and we can know more about them in a timely fashion than what the milestones allow.
Let me tack on to that and explain a little bit about the biopsy versus autopsy, because everybody's always wanted to compare education to other industries, right? But the key is, again, I don't think anybody would accept going to a doctor and being told, well, come back in a year and we'll see how you've done. If you've got a cold, or if you've got a virus, or if you've got strep throat, you want to get the remedy for that. You want the doctor to do an analysis, tell you what's wrong, and fix you, not a year from now, which is basically what we're looking at. If we simply relied on the milestones to allow teachers to impact what the students academically are being able to accomplish, we would not be making movement, because it's after the fact. The milestone is given at the end of the school year. The results do not come back until generally after the teachers are already off contract. And so I don't know about you, but if I'm a teacher, I'm looking at this year's students, not last year's students. So, you know, and John was a little bit polite in saying that we're one of the few. We're the only district that has a CTLS type system to where teachers can administer assessments and have the data back instantaneously. There is no waiting period. So to your point, Mr. Morgan, about the having to disaggregate data, consolidate the data, and then disaggregate it based on what you want to see, yes, we had our teachers doing that by hand over the weekend and at night. Now it's done for them, to your point. You run the report, you see the students individualized down to the standard for a particular student and what their level of understanding is about that. That data in the hands of a teacher is tremendously valuable, that allows them to make those academic gains that everybody expects out of Cobb County schools. So I appreciate you bringing that up, Mr. Sweeney, because it's a very important point to make. And again, you know, last year out of the legislative session, SB 362, that was brought about by our own Lindsay Tippins, was meant to provide flexibility to those assessments, such that a district like us that already has a system in place to where you're giving assessments throughout the year to affect change and improvement in those students' understanding of the standards and comprehension and proficiency, then by all means, we ought to be able to, instead of doing milestones, do something that we're already doing. So, and I think that we can certainly be a model for the rest of the state in that regard, because, again, we're the second largest school district in the state. Anything that, as far as new implementation that has come about from a state level, and this is since, you know, 27 years ago when I first entered into education, the failure point has always been singular. It's scalability. When you start talking about scaling to almost 200 school districts, a pilot program can very much become outdated instantly because it can't scale. So being able for districts that already have a system such as ours, and that legislation is extremely valuable and greatly appreciated as we look to how we move forward with it.
Yeah, the point, you know, you bring up some great points. You know, my feeling has always been is that, you know, if teachers can deliver formative assessments and they can get real-time data that's going to be actionable, they can turn their instructional efforts around and, you know, make very, very unique presentations to specific students, which is very good. Another thing that I had a question about, too, is related to parents' accessibility to this information. I had several constituents reach out to me and say, where do I get it? How can I get my students' scores? Candidly, they're very proactive individuals, very vested in their children's education, and what they want to do is they want to see actionable data and say, well, my child, you know, this is how they performed, and maybe there's some assistance that we can steer in their direction as they prepare for the upcoming school year. So how do families, how do parents, how do guardians get this information?
Yeah. So again, technical answer, and then maybe the answer to the real question, which is how do I, as a parent, help my kid? And I want to put actionable data in my hands immediately. So milestone reports and scores, again, are reported back to us as a district. As I indicated in the middle of July, those individual score reports are in, or can be, in parent hands now. Those are accessible at the local school level. At the district level, we have scores and, frankly, a relatively detailed summary available on our website. If that's of interest. I hear the real question being, how do I help my kid, and how do I get data into my hands right here and now? And that's where you've heard a little bit about CTLS Parent. You'll be hearing more about that as we begin to roll that out over the course of this year. We have a implementation plan. I'm not going to say it out loud in terms of exact timing. The superintendent might if he so chooses, but we plan to be able to put CTLS Parent, which would put, again, that ground level data in the hands of parents in the very near term, this school year. Again, the superintendent can be more detailed with that if he so chooses, but we look forward to being able to, again, provide real actionable data, again, through a tool. And I want to just focus, this is not a conversation about technology being the answer. The answer is teachers. The answer is teachers being given tools which tell them what they need to know about kids. And that pivot makes a difference because it's not a kid in a screen. Kid in a screen has been tried and failed, frankly, in districts across the country. The right tool tells teachers the right information about what kids know and what they don't. We're right there. And again, we'll have more detail on CTLS Parent throughout the course of this fall.
Great. And I want to applaud the board and the superintendent and staff because this CTLS effort in the program is amazing. I can see where we'll be well in advance of what the state is yielding to us right now. And I'm not suggesting we should ever be in a position where we're adding more testing. If anything, I would love to see if we could get waivers from, issuing that. Unfortunately, I don't see that happening because the state is really going to want our data. And they're going to use it as benchmarking or whatever the case may be. But again, thank you for these efforts because I think the tools that we're providing are allowing families and children and teachers specifically to advance students' academic achievement. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. Ms. Thayer?
Thank you. Chris, I'd like to go back to a point that Mr. Morgan brought up, and that is when an area is identified, and this is probably going to be Jennifer Lawson also, but when an area is, I know we're doing well across the board, but when we identify a specific school in a specific area that's not doing well, let's say one particular school in Algebra 1, what is the system-level process of addressing that?
So let me start at elementary first and just rewind and talk about the early literacy intervention. That was brought about because the students predominantly in the schools that we selected for those proof of concept were below grade level in reading. So that was identified, that was put into place. The same types of things are being done at middle and high school. Obviously, literacy is a focus by third grade to have everybody on grade level reading by third grade. When you get into specifics, content supervisors in Jennifer's area, they are the ones that are focusing on the teachers at the schools that need additional resources or, again, going back to the tool, it's easy to put the data in the hands of the teachers. Well, it's not easy, but it's easy now with CTLS for us. The biggest challenge for any tool of this category, if you will, is, okay, now what? You have the data, so now what do you do? So again, going back to the literacy model at elementary, we have assistant superintendents meeting with via video teleconference with teachers and principals at that level, sometimes with as few as under 10 students to talk about, okay, these students have done this much academic progress, what do we need to do differently? So it's not just, here's the tool, teacher, go out and do your best with it. This is truly hands-on from all levels that gets down to the classroom level. So Jennifer, I'll let you speak to once we get into middle and high school in the specific subject areas.
To answer your question, Ms. Thayer, for example, this year when we take data and we kind of try to triangulate it, we don't want one piece to signify something that may not actually represent the totality of an issue. But for example, for lack of a better word, a strategic support plan. So we had 6 schools that we looked at that between accountability and leadership and the academic division met to look at the data and said, hey, here's some real focused and targeted areas. And then our team up in the academic division, the content supervisors that Mr. Ragsdale is speaking to, then prioritized those schools as far as professional learning, support, and resources. And so I have a master plan so that I know where our math supervisor is working with this particular school and has already guaranteed her time and resources first to that particular school. It's very hard when you can't get everywhere at one time. So to answer your question, we try to very much prioritize time and resources and people to make sure that we're getting in there. Mr. Ragsdale was speaking, as was Mr. Morgan. about our high school work that's very similar to the literacy work when we tagged Algebra 1 and ninth grade Lit as being kind of that gateway. If we lose students as not being successful in those grades, we stand a good chance that they may drop out and not graduate at all. So, for instance, they're on a 15-day cycle where they use CTLS to break down these assessments. Our content supervisors have helped those teachers go in, and if it's helpful, to help them write it and to march that content out so that we're sure we get it. We will create those assessments for them. We'll get them into CTLS. The teachers give them in a pattern that makes sense to them. And then we meet the content supervisor who's working, so it could be math and ELA in this particular instance, as well as the assistant sup over that school, myself, Tracy Doe for special ed and counseling. And so we meet almost every 20 days to really look at what's that 15 days worth of data. And then we go walk classrooms as a unit of professionals to talk about what we're seeing and what's our next step, so that you're breaking it down into monthly increments almost, rather than waiting at the end of the semester on a milestone to tell you that didn't go so well. We've lost a whole group of students. So we've tried very much to replicate the elementary as developmentally appropriate based on what we see, and then we work very closely with the leadership assistant sup as well as the accountability division to really pinpoint and prioritize those places first and foremost with our resources.
So let me ask Jennifer, 100 years ago when I was doing it, we had less data, less information, certainly less frequently than you have. But every time there was data, we would go out and just simply talk with principals and division heads and say, there seems to be an issue here. What do we all need to do? And let's put resources together. So anytime there are situations like this, like an Algebra 1 and things, we as a board I'm asking a question actually, can we as a board be assured then that all curriculum efforts are being focused on providing resources and working with those schools to make sure that those problems in that school are being addressed and are being worked with as best possible?
Yes, ma'am. We certainly want to support all 117 of our schools, but Mr. Ragsdale's vision and direction to us has been that we really do use data to drive decisions. So we start with the data. When we have a red flag, we then go look at the triangulation of data to really suggest that's a trend, that really is a problem. And then, yes, ma'am, time and resources from human capital to actual resources to the money that we have where additional supports may need to be purchased or provided. That's how we prioritize our time and resources now.
So to be specific then, so our curriculum division was certainly already aware of the problems in Algebra 1 in certain schools, and you're already working with the principals and staffs in those schools to correct those problems.
Yes, ma'am. Actually, in July, say it was a given school, the assistant superintendent,
Right.
whichever areas were present from the academic division and accountability, and then we mapped out
Right.
exactly what would be offered to those schools, and we will follow up and work that plan until
Right.
the duration of this year is over, and then we'll look at the data again.
I think the example to use, too, is you keep mentioning Algebra 1 is Pebblebrook High School. Pebblebrook High School did not go up by 14.1%, but by accident.
Right.
It was deliberate. It was intentional. It was intervention. They needed assistance. We provided assistance. Again, it's the two types of employees. Those in this building that serve those that teach went out and served those that teach.
Well, and that's one of the points I was trying to reassure myself of and to make sure the board was aware of, that it's not just isolated events happening in schools. Certainly with all this information, if we're a well-functioning school system, the central staff is aware and they're working with the local staff. These things, we're not the first ones to identify these problems. They've already been seen by the staff and they've already been addressed. Hopefully, we're functioning at least at that level. So we have all those things already in place. You know, it's not news to somebody, and these things are already being addressed by experts. So, okay, thank you.
Mr. Banks, and then Mr. Morgan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Got several questions. We recently got the milestone reports and the numbers and the data. And trying to go through and understand what that means to me or to a parent was very confusing. I questioned the relevance I question the value, because it doesn't give us an idea of where a student is really at. Now, CTLS does give that capability to us if we utilize it, because we could do CTLS will give us student by student data. The teacher at that point in time, and hopefully we've implemented the parent module, can take corrective action immediately. But when you go take something like the milestone, where part of it is in the course, so part of it is in the grade. So now you got parents out there trying to figure out, what the heck does this mean? How does it relate to me? How does it relate to my student? It doesn't. It just does not relate. And a parent, if they can even understand the data, is going to be very, very confused. Now, CCRPI is a little bit easier to understand, but CCRPI, I think ever since it was implemented, has changed every year. Is that correct? So you can't compare one year to another year 100% because it's not there. Again, it comes back down to, what does CCRPI tell you? It tells you that cohort made this score. Now, what made up that cohort? What were the factors? What were the environments that cohort experienced? A cohort may be very high in grade level, and it may be very low, but based on the environment that particular cohort is established in. So I question these numbers that we're getting from Milestone CCRPI as to the value and to the relevance. I understand numbers. We have to work with numbers, and that's just part of our life. But to me, it's just hard when it comes down to relating all this data back to a parent level. I don't think they relate to it. I don't think they understand. And the question, if I was a parent with the child still in school, I would say, how does this relate to my student, to my child? And I don't think they can do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Banks. Mr. Morgan?
Thank you. Before I ask the question, one other shout out I want to give is TAP Middle School with Dr. Wilcher. And ELA, the district's average for students who made a 3, which is considered proficient, is 43.6% of the 8th graders in Cobb County made a 3, which means proficient, which is a good number. At TAP, 44.1% of those 8th graders made a 3. So they exceeded the district's average, which, you know, I know that's way down in the weeds, but you know what, principals, I think they appreciate hearing that, because that's not easy to, it's not easy to accomplish, as I said, especially if you're a particular type of school. The question I have is this, it's kind of on this, but it was brought up. Mr. Superintendent, do you think that, and I know it was done before, but do you think maybe in next month's meeting we can have a CTLS parent refresher?
Maybe not next month, but by the end of this calendar year, there are some other things in the works. Okay. That piece of it would roll nicely into, and we just need to get a little bit further down that path to where we can give you some truly relevant information.
Okay.
But definitely.
I appreciate that. And I think this is important. This might take a second, but I think this is important, Mr. Superintendent, because this comes from the context of the conversations I have. See, we can sit up here and we can say the district puts resources in there, right? But someone I might talk to, that's still real nebulous in general to them. So I would like, if possible, Mr. Superintendent, for yourself or Jennifer to explain what went into what the district did at Pebblebrook. Like, what was when it comes to the amount of time that you were testing students and an amount of attention, because what I think that does, it drills down more to the average person so that they can see that it's more than just the district is doing more. It really shows the level of commitment and attention that was given. So when you get that 14-point gain, you can see what process was put in place when it came to ninth grade algebra to yield that type of outcome. What exactly was that? What does that additional attention and resources, what does that look like?
Yeah, and one additional level not to leave out is the high school level assistant superintendent, because that's really the point person, if you will, because that person supervises the high school principals that they're assigned to. Obviously, we have 2, so they got 8 and 9 now that we have 17 high schools. So, yeah, your point is well taken, and Jennifer, I'll toss it over to you.
Mr. Morgan, it really was a broad scope. So if we start with just the academic piece, where we really did target the ninth grade algebra and the ninth grade lit, we took the touchstones through the CTLS that had been available, but really started working with those teachers and their academic coaches and the administration that were over those particular departments and those courses, and really looking at how can we break those assessments down into smaller pieces. So you very well could have gone into a Pebblebrook High School class, and on any given day, you see students answering 3 or 4 quick questions. And then the data from that is then what we discussed in about our every 15 to, usually it was about the 17th day. It was a 15-day cycle, so we knew we were going to be assessing students no more than 15 days to catch anything. But then on about the 17th day, the administration for Pebblebrook, as well as the key staff, to Ms. Thayer's point, that are in the academic division, who really are the content experts, including Dr. Doe, who's over the counseling, special education, so that we really didn't leave any cohort of children. Whatever we were discovering was the issue, the expert in the room, who then had access to the resources and the information, was able to work very closely with Pebblebrook in the next following few days to kind of set the path for the next cycle in the right direction. But again, while it was CTLS and you're really looking at that double-digit gains, we were also addressing, we were looking at attendance, we were looking at behavior. So whatever we were looking at as a contributing factor to the overall student success, those were the things we targeted, and then those are the things we consistently monitored, and we didn't talk in broad strokes. Mr. Ragsdale is correct. You'd get down to individual teacher, and you'd get down to this individual group of 8 kids that might have scored the exact same thing on the last assessment, and then we started being able to really target these specific children and put them into groups where accelerated intervention could be provided. So if that helps to give you a clue as to kind of where we were targeted, it was both the academic achievement, but we were also trying to address those other pre-learning conditions.
Yes, it does. I just wanted people to get a quick glimpse that it is very intentional, and the district is paying attention, and that, you know, there is an intentionality when it comes to more frequency of children being tested and teachers being trained, and more conversations between the area soup and the principal. All those things factor into, so when you see that score jump to that degree, you see that that the process was intentional about that happening. And as I said, I'm really excited, because if that's duplicated, we should see another good gain, not only for Pebblebrook, but for other schools who might have a similar process.
Let me jump in too, and because I'd be remiss if I didn't say this. We're talking a lot about assessing, and I know that in parents' minds, they are hearing, oh my gosh, there's so much assessment, the test anxiety kind of stuff going around, and that's real and that is accurate. What we're talking about is you cannot take good assessing out of the educational process. To know where students are, you have to be able to assess them. Now, that being said, to have an assessment that checks a box for a federal requirement or a state requirement, I think that was the intent of SB 362, is to allow districts the flexibility that have what we have to be able to not necessarily have to do those checkbox assessments, which is what parents and they may not name them by name, but that's what they're talking about, is the assessments that are developed and with no rhyme or reason about the amount of time they're taking when the assessment takes 90 minutes and the class schedule is for 60 minutes. Okay, that's not hard math. That's not even Algebra 1.
And not even.
You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So that's square peg, round hole. So, so that being said, I do want the parents to and everyone to truly understand there is a total difference between, and John mentioned this, assessing children and assessing for children, for students. And that's what we need to focus on, is the assessing to make the performance outcomes where they need to be.
Thank you, Mr. Ragsdale. Ms. Thayer?
Well, thanks. Thanks, Ms. Lawson. I think you just described what an effective school system does. I mean, you have central level staffs in different departments who work together and identify problems and work with school level staffs and administrations to effectively implement programs that alleviate problems and so forth. And that's what sometimes as a board we forget, our board members, and we look at a problem and go, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? And we forget that we have hired tons of experts out here to deal with those problems. Well, pretty good many anyway. To deal with those. You forget, I come from the day when I ran a high school with 2 assistants, so to me it's tons. But anyway, still never enough to deal with what we need to do. But again, thank you very much, and thank you for reminding us that you're all effectively doing what we need to be doing to support our schools. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Floresta. Well done. We now have board agenda items with Mr. Ragsdale.
Yes, sir, Mr. Chair, members of the board. Agenda item number 1 is the monthly recurring agenda item for the disposal per district administrative rule DO-R. That list has been sent electronically to all board members. Be able to take any questions at this time if you have any.
Consent.
All right,
No
and
objection.
then agenda number 2 and 3, I'm going to ask Mr. John Adams to come and bring those 2 agenda items.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Ragsdale, Mr. Chair, members of the board. I apologize for any strange noises you may hear because I am on near lethal amounts of cold medicine. But with that in mind, we bring you agenda item number 2, recommendation to approve easements for Brown Elementary School, Griffin Middle School, Nickajack Elementary School, and right-of-way and temporary easement at Vaughn. Very briefly, Georgia Power at both Brown and Griffin. Georgia Power is requesting an easement to allow us to hook up electricity to the portables, essentially a new power pole with a transformer and then power lines to the portables. Greystone Power, similarly at Nickajack, easement to allow to hook up electricity to the portables, very similar. And then Cobb County DOT at Vaughn is asking for the right-of-way and temporary construction easement for the purposes of installing sidewalks on Nichols Road. So obviously at no cost to the district, we're recommending that you approve these easements at Brown, Griffin, Nickajack, and then the rights-of-way and temporary easement at Vaughn as well.
Consent. Mr. Scamhorn?
I have a question, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Just real quick, Mr. Adams, through the years, most of our easements, are just no-brainers as far as an advantage to the system, to the school system. But curiosity, who reviews these requests within our system to make sure it's to our advantage?
Sure. It starts with Dennis Campbell and Mr. Parker and their staff in the SPLOST office, and then they're all reviewed by the board attorneys as well from a legal perspective, and then ultimately my office and the superintendent. So we have quite a few levels of review to make sure that these benefit the district and most importantly the students.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Without objection, consent.
Next item, agenda item number 3, recommendation to amend the lease agreements with Crown Castle for cell towers at both Mabry and Cheatham Hill. As you're aware, we have cell towers at a number of schools, and it's time for us to revise and extend lease agreements with Crown Castle at both Mabry and Cheatham Hill. Very short version is we're recommending that we revise and extend these for an additional period. The revenue will increase by 15 to 20% for each additional period, which is obviously a good news story for the district. And we're recommending that you approve these amendments to revise and extend these cell tower agreements with Crown Castle at both Mabry and Cheatham Hill at no cost to the district.
Mr. Sweeney?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Quick question, John, and it's interesting, we actually have administrative rules that address some things relative to our cell towers. I believe that in our lease agreements for the initial terms, we collect the revenue on the front end. Do we know, is that still the case for each subsequent term?
Yes, I believe you're correct. I have dates beginning at each of the 5-year subsequent terms.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Consent, everybody go with that? No objection, consent?
Thank you.
All right, Mr. Chair, members of the board, I'm going to ask Mr. Darrell York to come and bring the administrative rule modifications.
Mr. Superintendent, Mr. Chair, members of the board, you've had 3 administrative rules for review. Mr. Scamahorn, I believe they are in your notebook this month. And
yes, sir. I've been looking at them. I have several questions, but I'll ask the permission of the chair.
yes, sir.
Since you addressed me.
Just to make one point on Administrative Rule JCEB, Mr. Banks did point out formatting error on line 35 that has been corrected.
Let's go. Mr. Scamahorn, and then Mr. Sweeney.
Okay. And Mr. Chair, I can go back and forth, so I'm not sure what Mr. Sweeney wants to, but please interrupt if you need to. On the first one, authorized uses of equipment and supplies. And, well, let me back up a little bit. On the first sheet here, the modifications to administrative rules, thank you for providing that. I know you've provided it before, but, or I think you have.
Yes, sir.
But, okay, but I usually go straight to it, but for some reason or other, it caused me to go back, and I like what your intent is, what you're trying to do, or what you're doing with each
Thank
one.
you.
Having said that, looking at that summary, and then the first one, are we trying to go paperless?
Yes, sir.
Is that?
We've actually already gone paperless. We're just now catching up the rule to the practice.
Okay. All right, great. And I applaud you on that. As long as the servers stay up and we can find the electronic version. Oh, I was just kidding. And Mr. Chair, I'll yield until we get to the second and third one if we want to do this one at a time.
Go ahead, Mr. Sweeney.
All right. Actually, I did have a question. It's regarding the construction on district property funded by others. If you go to lines 10 through 13, general requirements, it requires approved by principal, project coordinator, designated by SPLOST, CFO, and superintendent. If we're improving we'll call it a non-educational facility, principal wouldn't apply. So I think there may be just a cleanup because you wouldn't have a principal's approval for like this building, for example. Does that make sense?
Yes, sir. The intent of the rule usually is about booster clubs building on local school facilities, but yes, if they were to build something here on this facility.
And it's not a major change.
Sure.
It's just more of a, just.
If applicable.
Yeah, just a little cleanup. The next item, hang on a second here. Pursuance project coordinator. For projects under $25,000, and this may be more of a SPLOST department question or somebody else, but is there a reason we are not requiring completion guarantees for those?
That I don't have an answer to because that was not actually part of the changes themselves.
Right, I understand.
It's something
that.
we could definitely take a look at.
I'm wondering, and and oftentimes it's going to be dependent upon whatever the cost of that bond may be or whatever. But the thing is that you'd hate to have somebody launch and start a project yet not complete the project. and so forth. So that may be something for us to take a look at relative to.
Which line are you on?
That's line, well, it's actually kind of, it's not in there, is my point. It's like something that we should consider. For larger scale projects, it is something that we actually require. But, even a $25,000 project, I mean, if somebody was to start on something and then mysteriously stop, you've got a mess to unwind, potentially.
All right.
And I got another one here. Bear with me. In line 66 through 68, it says it references project coordinator and approved by coordination record. I think interdepartmental, isn't there a interdepartmental coordination that goes on, or is there actually a coordination record department, or?
No, there's actually, the coordination record is actually a document that is distributed between departments to make sure there's coordination on that.
Okay.
And so that's part of the process and what threshold we use that at.
All right, that makes sense. And then skipping to payments, line 226. This has to do with cell towers. It said that the monthly fees as defined by the lease agreement shall be paid to the district's project coordinator. It's a curious thing. I mean, wouldn't the remission be to the Cobb County School District versus an individual?
Yes, sir. We can definitely go back and take a look at that language. Yeah,
somebody sitting there as the district project coordinator is collecting a tidy sum. So I think we'd probably change that language as well. And I think with regard to, I know that projects of certain size are applicable, must comply with Georgia law. Talk about E-Verify and so forth. I noticed that language was inserted relative to some of the larger projects. Is that something, and again, this is more of a board question, is that something that we would consider imparting for smaller projects as well? And again, I know we have certain thresholds that we would consider, but just something to consider down the road. And
the thresholds addressed and the one change here are reflective of a new state law. But if those same requirements at your discretion want to be applied at lower levels, that would be an action of the board.
Terrific. All right.
Mr. Sweeney, would you repeat that? You said it was a question for the board. I didn't.
There are financial limits and so forth that stipulate the actions that we'll say that our procurement department must ensure that our contractors are complying with. Is that an accurate description?
Yes, sir.
And some of those, would stipulate that a contractor, doing work on school grounds must comply with E-Verify, for example. That is going to be for projects above a certain dollar amount. Is that correct? And so there may be projects that would fall beneath that that would not have to comply with that aspect. Is that also correct?
That is my understanding, yes, sir.
Okay, so just something to consider for the board. All right, thank you.
Mr. Chair, I have a quick question. And Mr. Sweeney got a couple of them answered. Thank you, Mr. Sweeney. On paragraph B, and I've read it a couple of times, so maybe you have to throw a rock at me here on construction. We're still on the construction of district property funded by others. Number one, we crossed out 10,000 and went to 25,000. Okay.
Yes, sir.
But down in the orange, we're back to 10,000, and I read that a couple of times. Shouldn't that be 25,000?
That actually has overlaid two separate changes. The first change, when we change from 10 to 25, has to do with an internal process that when we go through a project of less than now 25, it would not have to go through the complete coordination record that we use. The departments that are involved would still be involved in coordinating the work together. But for instance, Dr. Daniel may not have to be part of that coordination. So that's where the threshold has changed on that. Then we throw in a new law that says that anything above 10 has to be put on a specific advertisement for bids and that type thing. So we've combined changes both of a new state law and internal processes.
I understood what you said, but if somebody was reading this, would they understand it?
The other piece that we've done, not only have we changed the wording within the rule, but the documents that have to be completed that go along with this rule also reflect those changes. So we've tried to spell it out in a step-by-step process in the paperwork. And I go back to, normally what we look at here are things like booster clubs building something, a new press box perhaps, and the process they would go through to get that approved, and that's spelled out step-by-step in that documentation.
So as a principal, if reading this, and as assistant principal, I did have a couple of projects where I did become familiar with this rule. If I read that, I say, okay, anything 24,999 or less, I don't have to bother with the district. I can take care of it. But if I understood what you just said, because of the changes on top of the changes, I would really be in error of assuming that, right?
Even under 25, it's not done at the local school. You would still have district involvement. What the district does in their involvement and how the project coordinator is assigned by SPLOST, what their responsibilities are is what has changed. So from the local school perspective, those processes don't change. It's what we do at the at the district level, and that process has changed.
Well, I'm going to yield to your wisdom, but I don't see it. If I'm at the school level.
And after 11 days, I'm yielding to Mr. Parker's wisdom on this one, so.
I don't see it. I don't see it. I understand what you're saying, and
Yes,
I
sir.
don't disagree.
Okay.
But I'm sitting in my principal's office or in a support office or whatever, and I read this, and I don't get what you just said. So if y'all like it,
And if there's a way that we can find to reword this to make it easier to understand, either through the rule or the implementation of that, we can certainly look at that.
okay, and I'll take it home and try to do some homework now. No, I understand that. And Mr. Chair, may I move on to the last one? Student hearing procedure. The thing that I get from there on page 5 of 5, subparagraphs A, B, and C to some degree, or to a large degree, and then there's a couple other places that we've lined out things, but we didn't put anything back. I'm concerned, are we lessening our guidelines? Are we making this more flexible when we shouldn't?
No, sir. The language that was taken out of this particular rule dealt with, you'll remember as a former administrator, the old 10+10 suspensions.
Right.
And we would limit to students only being able to make up work for so many days. With the advent of Ombudsman and our alternative education program, our students are getting their credit through that process. So we see less and less of the old-fashioned 10+10 suspensions because we don't have an alternative school to send them to. We have an alternative program. And so this language actually, deleting this language actually brings the rule up to the current practice that we have.
So it's not lessening our authority or our ability to
No, sir. It just brings the rule more in line to our current practices.
Okay. Then, and I apologize I didn't mark it, but somewhere in here they said that a student on suspension could not use the virtual programs or computer programs to, let's see. Shoot, I wish I was, and I meant to mark it and I didn't. But anyway, the gist of it is that, okay, I'm at North Cobb High School and I get suspended, but I can't use my computer courses to go ahead and make that up, or something that says something like that, and I'll get with you later if not. But my concern is if I'm at Horizon High School or New Horizon High School and I get suspended from that, why can't I just continue doing my work at home? Is that not allowed?
Line 217 is what you're referring to. And in that particular case, the issue there is if I'm suspended from school for a long-term period, the district offers our ombudsman platform. The intent of that phrase is that I can't opt to do Cobb virtual instead of ombudsman. Ombudsman is the platform we use as an alternative platform for students who are suspended. So students who are suspended are not given a lot of choice as to their platform. We have a program, it's designed specifically for students under suspension. And so we don't offer CVA for students under suspension.
My compliments, it is line 217.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. But does that really answer my question about somebody at Horizon High School? They're not, in other words, they would be shut out from their computer programs at Horizon.
They would have an alternative at ombudsman at that point. Yes, sir.
Ombudsman. If the same courses aren't offered at Ombudsman, is there, or should we consider exceptions for them to be able to stay on their computers?
We do, yes, sir.
Okay.
If the ombudsman platform does not have the specific course they're already enrolled in, then we find alternatives, and the ombudsman platform will access Cobb Virtual on behalf of that child.
Okay, great.
So yes, sir, we do.
Okay, you knew what I was going to ask you from all along, didn't you? And thank you for including this again, my compliments. I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Scamhorn. It's a pretty good line, 217.
Yeah, that was good.
I like working for the commercial on TV with farmers. We've seen that. Anyway, next we have approval of the agenda. If there's no objection.
Well, there's not a vote for administrative.
Oh, that's right.
If there's no objection, our agenda is approved. And I need a motion to go into executive session to discuss personnel and legal.
And student. Okay, stay with that.
All right, personnel, land, and legal. Mr. Sweeney?
Mr. Chair, make a recommendation, we go to executive session to discuss land, legal, and personnel matters.
Second.
Ms. Thayer? All in favor? Opposed? Motion carries 7-0. We are recessed to executive session, and we'll return at approximately 7 o'clock.